My Jewish mother threw me out of the house because I came home with an inappropriate tattoo. In retaliation, I burned her house down. One night, I came home to my Jewish family with a new tattoo proudly displayed across my chest. The moment my mother saw it, she declared that I was no longer welcome in the house. Shocked, I confronted her, demanding to know if she was really kicking me out. I got up close and said, "You're kicking me out?" "No way." That's when my dad stormed into the room. He noticed the tattoo and, without a word, struck me with his palm. The blow was so hard that I fell over, crashing my chest into the edge of a chair. I stood up and shouted, "You want me gone? Fine. But remember, I'll be back." I stormed upstairs, packed my things, smashed the bathroom mirror out of pure rage, and left the house. The last thing I said to my mother was, "You'll pay for this with your life." I guess I should explain why I got the tattoo in the first place. I never wanted to follow the Jewish faith that felt too traditional and boring. The constant holidays, the religious schooling, and the endless Shabbat services were all suffocating to me. The rabbi's services were long and dull, but my parents forced me to sit through them. Now that I was 18, I finally had the chance to live life the way I wanted. After getting kicked out, I called a buddy of mine who introduced me to the tattoo. He was part of a group I found on Facebook. Their ideas were radical and completely different from the values I grew up with, which intrigued me. They didn't have any restrictive rules, and they taught me that some people were simply superior to others. When I joined this Facebook group, they initiated me and suggested I get the same tattoo that all the members had. That's the one I got that day. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I wasn't trapped by the suffocating traditions and rules my parents had drilled into me. I felt like I was finally in control of my own path. This group gave me a sense of belonging that I never had before. They didn't see me as a disappointment or a failure, like my parents did. They accepted me as one of them, treating me like a brother. That night, I crashed on my friend's couch. He understood what I was going through, since he'd also been kicked out of his house for different reasons. We bonded over our shared experiences, and we spent hours talking about the group. He suggested we go out that night to celebrate. At first, I didn't understand why we'd both been kicked out of our homes, but he explained that we should celebrate standing up for what was right and that we could call a few of the other group members to join us. He said they would be proud of me. We went out, and it was a fun night, but I couldn't shake the sting of betrayal from my parents. These guys from the group had become my new family. They had a vision for the world that made sense, a world where the strongest ruled. My parents had always taught me that everyone was equal and that we had to care for others. But the group showed me a different way of thinking. Why should I care about people who didn't care about me? Why should I sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of tradition? The more I talked to the group, the more I started to see my parents for what they really were: weak. They clung to their traditions because they were scared of the world and the truth. They hid behind their religion because they couldn't face reality. But I wasn't scared anymore, and I wasn't going to be like them. After that night out with the group, I decided I needed to make my parents' lives a living hell. I started small. The following week, I went back to their house late at night, after they were asleep, and spray-painted symbols all over the driveway and garage door. A friend from the group came with me and kept watch while I worked. By the time I was finished, the house was covered in symbols. I wanted them to wake up the next morning and feel the loss I felt. I wanted them to experience the same pain I did every time they forced me to sit through another endless religious service, and the same anger that had been building inside me for years. I had to pretend to be someone I wasn't, and I knew it hurt them. I could see the pain in their eyes, especially when my mom FaceTimed me, crying, begging me to stop. But I didn't. Every time they cleaned up the mess, my friends and I would return to trash their house again and spray paint messages on the windows. The phone calls didn't stop either. My mom kept pleading, saying I could come back home. She still thought she could fix me, that if she just said the right thing, I'd return. But I wasn't coming back, not ever. As the weeks passed, I became more daring. One night, I slashed the tires on our family car. It was the only car my family had, and my dad used it daily for work. I hid in the bushes and waited for morning, watching as my dad came outside to find the car with 4 flat tires. He called for my mom, and it felt satisfying to watch them panic, knowing they were stuck, unable to escape what they had done to me. This time, my dad didn't call me, but I could tell he was furious. He stormed back into the house, and I crouched just outside the living room window, listening to him vent. I heard him say that I wasn't the son he knew anymore, that I had become a stranger. He thought I was too far gone. My mom, on the other hand, hadn't given up. Her voice was full of desperation as she said that this was just a phase and that, with time, I'd come back to the boy she remembered. When my dad suggested calling the police, she refused, even though I had given her every reason to do so. In the end, she convinced him not to involve the authorities. I let things cool off for a few weeks to make it seem like I'd given up, but I wasn't done, not by a long shot. A few nights later, I was hanging out in my buddy's basement, the air thick with smoke and stale beer. I took a drag from my cigarette and leaned back. Trying to sound cool as I told the group, I slashed their tires and spray painted the house again. You should have seen my dad's face. He didn't even know what hit him. It was perfect. There was a brief silence before Cal, one of the older guys in the group, gave me a slow nod and clapped me on the back. "Attaboy," he said, "you're really coming into your own. Didn't think you had it in you, but you're proving us wrong." The others nodded in approval, and I felt a rush of acceptance I hadn't felt in years. But then Cal leaned in closer. He told me I'd been doing great work with my family, but there was more I could do. He mentioned a new family that had recently moved into the neighborhood, the only dark-skinned family around. Cal hated them, claiming they thought they were better than us and that their presence was lowering property values. He asked if I wanted to join him in paying them a visit. I knew what he meant. He was planning to take them out. I couldn't disagree with him. This was the first time the group seemed truly proud of me, and if I refused, they'd likely kick me out. I couldn't go back to my parents, so I nodded, agreeing to whatever they had in store. The night we went to that family's house was pitch dark. I rode in the back seat with Cal and the others, my heart racing not from fear, but excitement. The plan was simple. I'd heard them talk about this before, how they'd burned down houses and left families with nothing. When we got there, the house was quiet. We moved like shadows, creeping around the back. I watched as Cal poured gasoline in a precise line along the base of the house. It was clear he had done this many times before. My job was to light the match. As I stood there, staring at the house where a family was likely sleeping, I struck the match. The fire caught instantly, roaring to life. We left before the flames got too big. By the time the fire trucks arrived, we were long gone, and I could already imagine the chaos we'd left behind, the family stumbling into the street, watching everything they had burned to the ground. As we drove away, I felt a rush like nothing I'd ever experienced before. All the anger I had toward my parents, toward everything they stood for, found an outlet. Taking it out on that family, watching their lives crumble, it was satisfying in a way I never thought possible. A few days later, I was back in the basement with the guys, and they were all laughing, patting me on the back, telling me what a good job I'd done. But I couldn't stop thinking about that house, and that's when the idea hit me: if I could do this to strangers, why couldn't I do the same to my parents? But this time it wouldn't just be about destruction. I wanted to take what mattered most to them, their cherished heirlooms. My mom valued those above everything else: the menorah, the Torah, all those priceless relics of her family's history. I could already picture the look on her face when she realized they were gone. It would destroy her, and my dad would know it was me. He'd know that his son had taken everything they held dear. One Friday night, I waited until I knew they'd be out for Shabbat. It was the perfect time. I broke into the house and tore it apart, smashing family photos, ripping up furniture. I wanted my parents to come home to chaos, and the best part was destroying their religious items. The menorah, the Torah scroll they kept in the study, it all represented the traditions and beliefs they had forced upon me for years. Smashing everything felt liberating, like I was finally free from the weight of their expectations. I remember standing over the broken pieces of the menorah, which had been in my mom's family for generations, and feeling nothing but satisfaction. They deserved this. When they came home, I wasn't there to see their reactions, but I knew my mom had probably cried, and my dad had likely cursed me again. I didn't care. I had made my point. But I wasn't finished. Later that same night, I returned to the house, this time with a can of gasoline. I knew they were asleep inside, and I used the same tactics Cal had taught me: light it up and leave without a trace. I poured gasoline around the back of the house, struck a match, and watched as the flames began to spread. At first, it was exhilarating. I felt powerful, like I was finally in control. But as the fire grew, panic started to set in. The flames were much larger than I had imagined, and the smoke quickly became overwhelming. I ran, my heart pounding as the fire consumed everything. By the time I was far enough away, I could hear the sirens. My parents must have woken up and called 911. I watched from a distance as firefighters arrived and tried to save what was left of the house, but most of it was already gone. The next morning, I woke up to the police knocking on my buddy Alfred's door. They were looking for me. I didn't put up a fight when they told me I was under arrest. My parents had pressed charges. My mom had finally given up on me, and my dad didn't say a word. I was put on trial for arson, They told the court about how I had been acting out, how I had vandalized their home and destroyed their belongings. I didn't deny any of it. I had done all those things. But as I sat there, listening to my parents describe me as some kind of monster, something inside me snapped. I wasn't the villain here, they were. They were the ones who had kicked me out and refused to let me live my life on my own terms. They were the ones who had pushed me to this point. But none of that mattered in court. The judge didn't care about my reasons. He just saw what I had done and sentenced me to 5 years in prison. It's been a few months since I was locked up, and I've had a lot of time to think. I thought I was fighting for my freedom, for the right to live my life the way I wanted. But now, I'm not so sure anymore. I haven't heard much from Alfred or Cal since my sentencing, and I've begun to wonder if I made a mistake. I don't know if my parents will ever forgive me, or if I even want their forgiveness. But as I sit here, day after day, replaying everything that happened, I realize that maybe I was wrong.